All right, so we've got to talk about IMC and advertising, which is the fourth P in the marketing mix, and the last. And this is, I saved the best for last. This is the part of the semester. So at the beginning of the semester, we talked about marketing theory and the history of marketing. And a lot of what marketing is, people don't think of as being marketing. A lot of it's logistics. The oldest field in marketing, or one of the oldest fields in marketing, is transportation and logistics. And nobody thinks of that as being marketing, but it is. This is the part that everybody thinks of as being marketing. When you say marketing, the things that conjure up images in their mind are advertising, because we're bombarded by it. And so we're going to talk about IMC and advertising and promotion, the fourth P, and there will be one final critical thinking challenge. This is your last opportunity to win bonus points. There will be an individual and then your last opportunity to win bonus points as a group for the critical thinking challenge, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. I will hand these out so you can look at them, get an idea of where we're going. And this one is the most fun of the challenges. All right. So as I said just a minute ago, promotion is the fourth element of the marketing mix. And there is, unlike price, so we talked about price, and I told you that price is really a critical component of the marketing mix. It's where all the other elements come together because it represents what you're willing to sacrifice in order to get what you want. And as important as that is, obviously, if you don't have the right price, things fall apart. Even if you don't think about this in financial terms, if you think about it in terms of your friends, right? What is price? Price is what you're willing to sacrifice to get what you want or what somebody else wants to achieve. So if your friends say, let's go bowling on Saturday night, I'm using this example because one of my best friends contacted me and she's like, are you going to be around this weekend or are you going to the lake? And I was like, well, I was planning on going to the lake because that's what I do this time of year. It's that time of year, you start going to the lake. And she's like, well, I'm supposed to be in Oklahoma City because her boyfriend, Don, is going to a bowling tournament. The socioeconomic class of a community is directly proportional to the number of bowling alleys that the community has. The lower class the community, the more bowling alleys they have, at least historically. Now, that's not necessarily true anymore because bowling is one of those sports that is dying largely as a result of your generation. You don't want to bowl. Although it's kind of gotten some upscale. There are some upscale bowling places now, like Main Event. What used to be Red Pen, and now it's something else in Bricktown. And now this movie theater over here in Covello's got a bowling alley. So maybe it's making a comeback. But she didn't want to go bowling with her insignificant other or watch him bowl. I have to say, I kind of like bowling. How many of you like bowling? I like bowling. Before I broke my hip, I was pretty good at it because I've got a pretty good aim. But once you broke your hip, it's hard for me to kick back with my right since I broke my right hip and get really low enough to throw the ball. So now I kind of run up there and drop the ball, and it's not nearly as good as it used to be. But anyway, she doesn't want to go watch him bowl. I like to bowl, but I can't watch bowling tournaments. It's kind of like watching golf tournaments on television. I just don't get it. I think they took a shot of a ball flying through the air 50 years ago, and they've shown the same ball flying through the air. You know, I like to play golf. Can't stand to watch it. It's boring. Bowling is about, you're just watching the same ball go down the same lane and the same pins over and over and over again. And so I don't want to watch that. So I understand that. So the price for her is not right. She wants to do something else. She's going to come with her boyfriend. She's like, I need you to entertain me. Because as attractive as, she finds her boyfriend or whatever, she doesn't find it attractive enough to sit there and watch him go through a bowling tournament all day, throwing the same ball at the same pin. So the price isn't right for her. I mean, this is not an attractive option. And so there's no marketing occurring in that situation. She's going to go do something with me instead during that time because she doesn't like the price. The price of admission is to have to sit there and watch him bowl, and she doesn't want to do that. So she's going to do something else. So price is really important. There's no unifying theory. When we come to promotion, there is a unifying theory. And it's not a grand level theory. And what I mean by grand level theories, and we talked about this at the beginning, are things that sort of explain everything, a way of thinking about the acquisition of knowledge of grand level theories. But there is a unifying theory, and it is integrated marketing communication for the promotion mix. So the promotion mix is all of the tools that are used to inform prospects about benefits. So it's word of mouth, it's or trying to engage in encouraging people to engage in word of mouth, which is what Amazon tries to do through their rating system, for example. Television advertising, print, billboards, media, radio, all of those kinds of things that we can use to inform prospects about benefits, to persuade them to try it, and then to remind them about it after they've tried it, if they are a customer, get them to come back. And a program that coordinates all the promotional activities and speaks with a consistent voice, and this is the unifying theory, is IMC. So what we want is we want to be consistent in our message. If you don't, the message gets muddled and your consumer will develop their own message for you, and that's not what you want. So this is the communication model. You have a sender, they encode, goes through a medium, there's noise, decoding, and then the receiver. And so I want to read to you a passage from Warren Buffett's biography, Snowball. Who is Warren Buffett? I think I've asked this before. As business pictures, this is just frightening to me that you don't know.
He's a very
ripping off your tongue who Warren Buffett is. If you've gotten to this point in the business school and you don't know who Warren Buffett is, I am really scared for your future.
Successful business.
Okay, well, that.
Doesn't he own a lot of stock in Coca-Cola too?
No, Pepsi.
So CEO of Berkshire Hathaway.
Yes, he's the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. At one point in time, he was the wealthiest man in the world. Berkshire Hathaway, he's called the Oracle of Omaha. Berkshire Hathaway is, let's look at what a Class A share of Berkshire is going for today. Berkshire Hathaway stock today, Class A share is $316,000. One share. So I would be, if I were a Berkshire owner, I'd be kind of concerned. So I want you to look at this model. And the reason I say I would be kind of concerned is because he is old and he's had cancer. He's had cancer a couple of times. And the value of Berkshire is really in Warren Buffett's head, and you'll get that in this. At one point in time, Warren Buffett and his alter ego, whose name is Charlie Munger, who's the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, were asked to take over Salomon. Salomon was in a lot of trouble. They had engaged in some real financial irregularities. They had lied to the Fed about certain things, and they were going down the tubes. And so they asked Berkshire and Warren Buffett to take over Salomon and get it right the ship at one point in time. The CEO at the time, Buffett and Munger take over. I almost said Buffett and Munger take over was a guy named John Gutfried. And he was fictionalized in a movie called The Bonfire of the Vanities, and his wife, who was often called Marie Antoinette, was fictionalized in that movie as well. But he had created a big mess at Salomon, and Buffett comes in to clean it up. After he's left Salomon, there is a matter of, and as you may recall, during the last financial crisis, AIG paid out millions of dollars in bonuses to executives who were part of the problem of why AIG was seeking a financial bailout from the U.S. government. And it annoyed a lot of people. And something similar happened at Salomon. So this cycle repeats itself. But anyways, he had a severance agreement. He had what was called the golden parachute. Lots of people have these as part of their package. This is an opportunity for you to earn individual bonus points. So I want you to look at this model, and as I go read through this, there's probably nothing worse than being read to, but I'm going to read the story at the end here of what happens to John Gottfried in Snowball, and go through it and figure out where in the communication process things are falling apart in this model. When it came time for Gottfried to discuss what money he would receive from the firm, he asked for fair treatment that he had been promised as long as Buffett and Munger were alive. However, it turned out what the parties' opinions of what was fair were dramatically different. So this is the first one. What is fair? So think about this in the communication model. Gottfried's lawyer thought that he had made a deal with Charlie Munger on a fateful weekend in August of the previous year, and that Munger had accepted a resignation letter conditioned on a highly lengthy list of severance terms. Gottfried felt that he had fallen on his sword to save the firm and thought he was owed $35 million in back pay, stock options, and severance. Solomon, however, took the position that Charlie Munger had made no deal at all. So this is another one that you can get bonus points for. So we'll talk about these at the end. The board agreed to interpret Gottfried's employee benefit plans strictly, and also took back the stock options he had earned, even though the stock option plan contained no provision allowing for forfeiture under this or any circumstances. It countered with $8.6 million. Insulted and outraged, Gottfried turned it down. It seemed wrong, he said, as a matter of principle, I thought. His lawyers interpreted the offer not as meant to inspire negotiations, but as so insultingly low that it must be dismissed out of hand. In 1993, Gottfried took Solomon to arbitration. Arbitration is a process in which a panel of neutral parties listen to both sides and reach a binding decision to resolve disputes. Arbitration is also a throw of the dice. For its very nature cuts off negotiations, for once a decision is reached, it is final. Gottfried had been reduced to sitting in a small three-room office where he answered his own phone when his part-time secretary was away. He brooded over the fact that Suzanne, now dubbed Marie Antoinette by the press, had told him not to resign, as if he had had an option, saying it would make him unemployable. They had been cast out of the New York social set. The press had turned on them savagely in a way he had never imagined could happen, comparing him to felons like Boesky and Milton. Many of his former friends abandoned him. Unassisted by Solomon, he was running up huge legal bills to defend himself in civil lawsuits. Gottfried wanted vindication through arbitration, but a public breaking and digging over the whole Solomon mess, which might have saved his wounded pride, was guaranteed to alienate Buffett and make him less likely to compromise. After Buffett had staked much of his image on Solomon, Gottfried had let him down. And to retell this story in arbitration, covered at full yelp by a dogged press, could not possibly inspire Buffett to reinterpret Gottfried's behavior more generously. Now that he and Gottfried were no longer partners in Buffett's special sense of the word, transgressions he might once have eventually forgiven became larger with hindsight. They were many, and even without benefit of hindsight, they were large. The stock option repricing in 1987, which had cost Buffett so much money. The Sternlight cocked gun letter from the Fed, which Buffett had learned about until it was too late. The meeting with Bob Glover at the Treasury when Gottfried had kept silent and had also kept it from Buffett and other board members. An equity plan that allowed an employee to keep his stock if fired for cause, which Gottfried had put before the board and shareholders late in the fateful spring of 1991. Buffett felt that the whole thing was a tragedy that should never have happened, and that Gottfried's behavior had somehow been some sort of weird aberration. Although he normally avoided conflict, it forced into his battles his proxies fought for him like cornered hyenas. Charlie Munger, who was inclined to say things such as, Gottfried made Napoleon look like a shrieking violet, was appointed bad guy in arbitration. His testimony would be crucial because he was the one who had negotiated with Gottfried's lawyer, Philip Howard. It was the young president of the New York Stock Exchange, Dick Grasso, who chose the three graying arbiters who would decide Gottfried's fate in a dingy conference room at the exchange. A team of lawyers from Craven, backed by testimony from Solomon board members, employees, ex-employees, Buffett and Munger, began to pulverize Gottfried in a process that took more than 60 sessions and several months before the arbitrators. Over and over again, the arbitrators heard about a meeting between Munger and Philip Howard in which Howard reviewed the list of compensation Gottfried wanted, and Munger listened in some fashion or another. All agreed that Howard had left without a signature on Gottfried's severance papers, but there was no agreement how to interpret the rest of the events of the evening. Howard was certain that Munger had made a deal with him. Gottfried's lawyers called Charlie Munger as a witness. Frank Barron of Craveth, Swain, and Moore had attempted to prepare Munger, who was utterly impatient with the process. Although Barron had prepared Munger by himself, Munger, a lawyer who disliked paying legal bills, extemporized to the arbitrators that in preparing him for his testimony, Craveth had employed an excessive number of expensive paralegals and aspirin carriers. When he began to testify, every word that came out of his mouth had nothing to do with what we had gone over, said Barron. Putting Charlie Munger on the witness stand was the most nerve-wracking, hair-raising experience I have ever had as a lawyer. Munger's confidence as a witness, however, was unmatched. A number of times the lead arbitrator would grow irritated and admonished him, saying, "Mr. Munger, would you please listen to the questions before you answer them?" Munger insisted that on the night when he and Philip Howard had met, he was deliberately not listening, being polite, but I wasn't paying much attention. I sort of turned off my mind. I was just sitting there politely with my head turned off. Gottfried's lawyers asked him whether he made a conscious decision not to talk as well as not to listen. "No," Munger said. "When the time came, I talked. One of my faults. I'm fairly outspoken. I may well have discussed some individual things that got through my band of indifference. This is one of the most irritating conversational habits I've had in my entire life, and it has followed me throughout the course of my life. So every time something would get through and I could see a counter-argument, I would give it." Howard had asked for indemnification for Gottfried against lawsuits. Being a legal matter, this had gotten through Munger's band of indifference. "I think I said to him, 'You don't know what you're going to need. God knows there will be litigation. This is a big damn mess. Who knows how things are going to work out? You're misrepresenting your client if you think it makes any sense to get into any of those issues at this time.'" "Was this a conversation in which you were tuning out?" Gottfried's lawyers asked. "No, I tend to tune in when I'm speaking myself," said Munger under oath. "I tend to remember what I say." "Was this a conversation in which you were deliberately not listening at various times?" "What? What did you say?" Munger said. "I just tuned out again. I wasn't doing it on purpose." "Was this a conversation in which at various times you were deliberately not listening?" "I'm ashamed to say I've done it again. Will you please do it one more time? This time I'll use some effort." Gottfried's lawyers repeated the question for a third time. "You bet," said Munger. "I was just going through the motions." In what mental state the arbiters, the lawyers, and Gottfried heard these words can only be imagined. Regrettably, much of the misunderstanding seems to have lain in Philip Howard's unfamiliarity with the outward signs of the workings of Charlie Munger's mind. He had labored that night under the illusion that he and Munger were having a conversation. He didn't recognize Munger's occasional replies as intermittent thought bursts ignited by some random mic that had pierced Munger's band of indifference. Whenever Munger objected, Howard assumed that they were negotiating, not that he was simply being lectured to. When Munger said nothing or emitted a grunt to move the conversation along, Howard inferred that Munger agreed, or at least had no objection to whatever had been said. Nobody had explained to him that Munger's head was turned off. Gottfried's lawyer reminded Munger of Buffett's testimony in which he had acknowledged saying to Gottfried that he had the power to make all these things happen. Did Mr. Munger recall Buffett saying that? "I don't remember Mr. Buffett's words as well as I remember my own," he said, "but certainly the gist of the thing was that you can count on us to be fair." The issue was what was meant by fair. Solomon never disputed that the money was Gottfried's and that he had already earned it. The argument boiled down to whether Gottfried would have been terminated had all the facts been known. Thus, the case became an exercise in proving that Gottfried should have been terminated. Even Donald Freudstein agreed that in concealing what he knew from Glauber, Gottfried had been dishonest with the government. Everyone thought this bizarre and out of character. Nonetheless, it had happened. In fairness to Solomon, Gottfried understood why the firm was expending so much effort to prove that he should have been fired. He knew that it was in everybody's interest to vilify him, but the lack of proportionality bothered him. At some point, it should have ended, he thought. Nonetheless, everyone, Buffett included, felt that Gottfried was entitled to some of the money. Buffett had Sam Butler, a fellow Geico board member and friend of Gottfried's, call him twice and offer him $14 million. Butler whispered, "I can probably get you a little bit more." Buffett would have gone as high as $18 million, but Gottfried had been humiliated by the process. He considered Charlie Munger mean-spirited and self-righteous. He turned the offer down indignantly. The arbitrators were decided. After months of testimony, lasting until the spring of 1994, the arbitrators were showing their impatience at the endless circular and conflicting arguments. One side professing complete innocence and the other portraying Gottfried as an arch fiend. Then at closing statements, Gottfried's lawyers showed up with a chart, raising the demand to $56.3 million by adding interest, penalties, stock appreciation, and other items. The lawyers and people involved at Solomon had set up a betting pool as arbitration crawled at an agonizingly slow pace towards its conclusion. How much money would the arbitrators give Gottfried? The lowest bet was $12 million. The highest was $22 million. No one will ever know what factors the arbitrators weighed in their decision. When the decision was announced, they awarded Gottfried nothing, not one dime. So there's a whole lot here. I read this passage because it really illustrates a lot that can go wrong in this communication process. So let's start with, at the time came when Gottfried was discussing what money would receive from the firm, he asked for fair treatment. What does that mean? How are you going to encode fair treatment?
Happy medium. Like
Okay.
each side is willing to, so one side is willing to receive and one side is willing to send. So basically, in this case, it's the money. So one side is willing to get, so 10 million, and then the other side is willing to send the 10 million. They have to agree on a certain amount of money or just.
Okay, so in this one, let's assume that all he said was, "I want you to be fair with me." Where in the model is that going to break down?
Okay.
Is he sending the message?
He's sending a message, so I think it's both. It could be, I'm saying I want fair treatment, right? And they're getting the same message. We all have heard the word fair before, but what it means is radically different to different people, isn't it? What I think is fair to you may not be what you think is fair. As a professor, what I think is fair may not seem fair at all to you. Right? Why is that?
We have different information,
Okay.
different minds, different ways of going about things.
Students often tell me, "But I worked hard on this project
Standards are different.
and I should get an A because I worked hard." There seems to be some equation in a student's mind, and I will admit that when I was a student, I felt the same way too. There seems to be some, in students' minds, some equivalence between working hard and outcomes. And I used to think that. I worked hard on it. I wrote this, I spent a lot of time writing this paper, and my English professor it would look like blood. I stopped grading students' papers in red a long time ago because I realized that they wouldn't read them. And it's easy to do now because I just grade them on D2L. It's easy for me to put in comments, and you still probably don't read them. Right? But I would work on these papers, and then my English teacher would, mark them up. And outcomes effort doesn't equal outcome necessarily. But students have a tendency to think that because I worked hard at it, and because society's maybe conditioned you to think that, why is it your generation particularly, started with my generation, but your generation particularly thinks that effort equals outcome? Why is that?
The American dream.
No, I don't think
Because
it's the American
socialism
dream.
came into it.
I don't think it's socialism. I think it's because school systems started saying everybody gets a trophy at primary and secondary education. Teachers are at primary and secondary levels overwhelmingly, when we talked about social styles, what are most teachers?
Soft.
They're pretty soft, which corresponds with what?
They're brand new. I mean, they're right out of college.
Some of them, a lot of them are not necessarily, but I think teaching lends itself to amiables, right? This is the social style. I think most they like people, they're amiable, right? That's not necessarily why college professors go into teaching. At primary and secondary levels, it's all about teaching, and they love the little children. And so everyone gets a trophy. Everyone. And in college, most people go get a PhD not because they want to teach. Most people go get a PhD because they want to do research. When I went to get my PhD at New Mexico State, I had applied at OU and I was accepted. And the chair of the Department of Marketing there said, well, you know, Grant, teaching is something that one must endure in order to do research. That's how a lot of college professors look at teaching. Teaching is peripheral in many instances to what we do as academics. That's not true at the primary and secondary level. And so at the primary and secondary level, what they want to do is they want to encourage students. I'm not saying that we don't here at UCL. I think at UCL, the vast majority of us who come here want to teach. That's why we went and got the PhD, because we want to. That may be what sets us apart from OU, is that A, you're going to see somebody with a PhD before you get to be a senior, and B, we pretty much want to teach. But that's not true of a lot of academics. And so if your model is that you want to teach little children, you want to encourage them. Now, I would argue that in doing so, it's sort of like when I used to be associate general counsel here, and they would bring me somebody that they wanted to terminate, and this person would have filed a grievance, which meant that I then had to sit in the grievance hearing and listen to it. And the employee would bring in stacks of years of their performance evaluation where it said, good job, great job, you're a fantastic employee. And I would, of course, inevitably ask the supervisor, did you say these things? Yes. Well, why did you say them? Well, I thought they would do better. I wanted to encourage, no. Like, if you tell people they're doing a great job, they're probably not going to do more. And so there's a lack there in the communication process, right? In both the encoding and the decoding. Gottfried's lawyer thought that he had made a deal with Charlie Munger on the fateful weekend in August of the previous year. What happened there in the communication process?
Decoding.
Yeah. Okay. On whose part? The lawyer thought, he said, I thought I was communicating that we've got a deal, and Munger thought he was communicating what? There's no deal, right? The board had agreed to interpret Gottfried's benefit plan strictly. Now, what does it mean to interpret a benefit plan strictly?
By exactly what it says.
By exactly what it says. This is what lawyers call the four corners test. You look to the document, so you look to the employment contract, and if you can ascertain what the contract means by the four corners of the document without going outside, you don't go outside the document. So we're going to interpret it strictly by the terms of the agreement. What Gottfried's lawyers wanted to use was what we call parole evidence, stuff outside the agreement. And you get into problems. Now, is it easier in looking at this encoding and decoding, is it easier to look at something like this that's on paper and ascertain the meaning? Yes. Than it is to look at parole evidence, which is the meeting that they had where they're not obviously communicating. Now, the biggest part, this is the one that will get you the most bonus points. What part of the model is it where this is the passage? Was this a conversation in which you were tuned out? No, I tend to tune in when I'm speaking myself, said Munger under oath. I tend to remember what I say. Was this a conversation in which you were deliberately not listening at various times? This is it. What did you say? I just tuned out again. I wasn't doing it on purpose. What part of the model is reflected by the
Decoding.
I don't think so.
Noise.
Who said noise? It's noise. Yeah. It's noise. Why is it noise?
It's like an interruption in the communication.
Yeah, it's the interruption in his brain. That's noise. Noise is anything that stops the message from being received. So right now, the geese are out there honking, and you can hear them, and that's distracting you from listening to what I'm saying. It's you're turning your brain off, and that's noise. So, okay, those of you who came up with that, see me after class, and we'll talk about bonus points. All right, so now what I want you to do for the critical, having thought about this model and all the things that can go wrong with this model is, I want you to find in your groups an ad that you think is great, and I want you to do basically this. You're going to pretend that you're the ad agency that developed it. So let's watch this commercial, which is a commercial about making a commercial. So you all have seen these commercials. This is the Choice Hotels.
Last year's ad campaign was a success for ChoiceHotels.com.
Bada book, bada boom.
This year, we're taking it up a notch.
So in this commercial, we see two travelers at a comforting with a glow around them. So people watching will be like, wow, maybe I'll glow too if I've directed ChoiceHotels.com. Who glows? Just say bada book, bada boom. Nobody glows. He gets it.
Always the lowest price, guaranteed. Book now at choicehotels.com.
All right. So you are going to pretend that you are an ad agency that's developed an ad. So find an ad that you really like. And then you're going to pitch it to the rest of the class. The rest of the class is going to be like the board of directors in that advertisement. We're going to look and evaluate whether or not the ad is really good. Why do you think the ad is really good? So you should consider who is the target of the ad. Who do you think the target, let's think just about the Choice Hotels ad. Who do you think the target of that ad is? Who do you think the target of Choice Hotels? Okay, I mean, travelers, there's a wide variety. People travel for a lot of different things. Business, pleasure. Who do you think the big target for Choice Hotels is?
Families.
You think it's families? Why?
It's low price.
It's for the low price.
Okay, all right. Business people don't try to get the best price?
Yeah, but isn't most businesses isn't paid for?
Yeah.
But don't they have a certain amount that they can spend on a hotel?
Yeah, most companies give you a maximum per diem. A lot of them base it off of the federal government's per diem charts. Now, when I was in corporate America, the company I worked for never did that. We never had a max that we could spend when we were traveling, which can be problematic. Yeah, it can be problematic, but our president, he thought if you're going to be away, that was a burden on you, and you shouldn't be denied the comforts that you normally have at home. That was his attitude. I personally liked that attitude, by the way. So, I thought it was a good attitude. So, who else do you think is a target for Choice Hotels? Think about the Marriott story that we watched. Who is Marriott? The first one that they started out doing the Marriott big box hotels, right? And then the first one that they built was a what? Well, the first, after they decided they were going to branch out and stop building big box hotels, they were going to go after the what? In the story that we watched on Marriott. They're going to go after the business traveler. They did $1 million worth of research, if you remember that video. $1 million of research to find out what the business traveler wanted. And what did the business traveler want? A better room at a lower price. That's what they found. The business travelers wanted a better room at a lower price. So they built their first Marriott, what was it, a Residence Inn in the outskirts of Atlanta. So who are the demographics of the ad that you're going to be choosing? What are the psychographics of those people? So are you looking for younger generation, older generation? What are the psychographics? Are they strivers? Are they, achievers? Things like that. What are the psychographics? What's the usage for the product that you've chosen? And then the communication model, consider why it's a good model. What is it encoding? What is it telling? So you need to argue all of these things. What are the ad's goals? Tell us why you think the ad is effective. And overall then, what makes the ad great? What makes it a great ad? You should submit a written analysis of this to the Dropbox along with the URL for the ad that you're going to present, which will be on Tuesday. And remember that this is your last chance to win bonus points for your group for truly outstanding submissions to this critical thinking challenge. It's the last chance that you got here at the end of the semester. All right. So I'm gonna let you have the rest of the time to work in your groups on that. If you talked and came up with things, come up before you get in your groups. I'll turn the video off for the day. And I'll do that, and then if you have questions, I'll hang around until you are finished answering questions. All right? Asking questions.
What should we do?